If you see it, it has already seen you. Whatever you do, don't smile at it. After seeing the forlorn thing, I rushed to an occult forum. There I met my nameless hero, and she recounted the tale of her harrowing night in a train station bathroom. She was hounded mercilessly by a thing that she called the Morose Man. But I wouldn't call it that. It was no man. At midnight, it departs. That was what she told me. And I'm usually skeptical about campfire tales from the underbelly of the internet, but I will believe everything I read about this unknown horror. After all, I've seen it for myself. A week ago, I was walking home from the office. Another evening of unpaid overtime. And that's always made worse by a chilly stroll down blackened streets at night. Liverpool is spectacular, but it's also an urban nightmare. The city can be a leery place at 11 in the morning, never mind 11 at night. "Alright, pet," a man slurred at me. I kept my head to the ground, zigzagging through a cluster of inebriated scousers. 10 minutes later, I escaped to the safety of the suburbs. Peace and quiet at long last. The tranquility of an empty world at night. Nothing quite like it. Just a man and his thoughts. At first I hardly registered the gentleman on the pavement across the road. The man who had been matching my pace for several minutes. My brain was foggy after working 12 hours. But, above all else, I had no cause for alarm. The tension of the day was dissipating from my body. Even a bitter, wintry night in Liverpool was better than the monotony of the office. It was as I turned to cross the road that I finally paid attention to him. The moment I stopped and turned, the man also stopped. But he did not face me. The stranger waited at the other side of the street and continued to stare directly ahead. He could have been a senile man, but that explanation did not slot neatly into the picture. There was something clunky about him. He did not belong. It wasn't about the lateness of the hour. No, it was about his demeanour. He seemed fragile, and yet he did not shiver in the biting breeze. He was simply glued to the pavement and staring forwards. "Excuse me," I said as I began to cross the road. "Are you okay?" The man did not shift his feet, but as I approached him, he twisted his neck to follow my movements. Feeling slightly uneasy around him, I stood a couple of feet away from the man on the pavement. There was something deeply unsettling about his face. Bags sank below his brown eyes that had the look of something false, something constructed to maintain appearances. His skin was askew on his skull, as if something else were underneath, and he was sad, so very sad. In answer to my question, he shook his head. The corners of his lips turned farther downwards, emphasizing the deep sorrow that he felt. "May I help you to get home?" I asked the old man. He did not speak. He simply shook his head again, a little more vigorously this time. His sulk deepened, and his brown eyes broadened. His gaze bolted tightly onto my face. Something about the man terrified me, but I couldn't say why. "All right," I said. "Have a good night." Before I turned, I did something that would forsake me. I smiled at him. It was the briefest display of kindness, but one that opened the gateway to hell. The man's brown eyes filled with blackness, and he began to shake his head slowly. Before I had a chance to ask what I'd done wrong, the man's bones began to crack, and then, inexplicably, he grew. His limbs lengthened, The man rose into a looming, malformed spectre. I screamed and sprinted away from the abnormal thing, the thing that I could hear clomping after me.
"Help!"
I cried, running down residential streets. Dogs barked and lights appeared in houses, but nobody answered my call. In fact, I saw curtains swiftly close. In the eyes of those homeowners, I must have just been another drunken fool returning home from the lash. I swiveled around, preparing to meet my maker, but the man was gone. I stood in the middle of the road, panting heavily. I was still a 15-minute walk from my house, but I didn't want that thing following me home. I noticed the local playground in the middle of the street. It was illuminated by a single lamppost, and it seemed marginally safer to be somewhere well lit and semi-sheltered. So I jumped over the fence and beelined for the small wooden structure in the middle. I crawled up the ladder and hid in the children's building. Police? Yes, I thought about calling them, but I had just witnessed something that defied all earthly explanation. I didn't think red and blue flashing lights could save me. That was when I scoured the internet for help, and I found the user I mentioned at the start of this tale. One particular message rang alarm bells in my head. "Stay away from doors," she messaged. "He can use them to find you." My eyes immediately shot to the plastic saloon doors which flapped in the wind. The entrance to my hiding place. Then, without a moment's warning, fingers slithered through the opening and curled around the plastic. I unleashed a primal cry as I swung my foot at the ominous hand.
"Ow!"
a voice yelled. When I opened the doors, I found myself facing a short, scruffy teenager. Not the Morose Man. The boy was lying on the squishy rubber flooring of the playground, massaging his hand. He looked up at me with stern eyes. "Why did you do that?" he cried. Who are you?" I asked, anxiously surveying the lightless play area. "Get out of here." "Me?" the boy scoffed, climbing to his feet. "No, you need to get out of here. I'm sleeping in there tonight." Noting the boy's rags and greasy hair, I had already assumed him to be homeless, and on any other night I would have offered him some help. But all I could think about in that moment was the 10-foot-tall monstrosity which was relentlessly pursuing me. It was still out there, somewhere, lurking in the darkness beyond the fence. The wind was picking up, and as I eyed the colourless nothingness beyond the play area, I couldn't help but feel watched. I suddenly felt very exposed. The playground no longer seemed like a cozy island in the darkness. "Listen, I don't care how much you've had to drink," the teenager started. "You don't understand," I told the boy. "It's not safe to..." A heavy creak sounded from behind me, and my eyes shot around to the back of the wooden structure. My body seized in fear, and I expected to find myself facing those dreadful eyes. But there was nothing at the back of the playhouse, only the endless night beyond the fence. And then there came a sudden crunch, like the sound of a boot in snow. I spun my head back to the front of the playground, and I found myself witnessing a scene of unimaginable horror. The gate to the park was swinging to and fro. The abomination of a man towered in the entrance. His mouth had stretched beyond the limits of his face, and half of the poor boy's body had disappeared down the creature's throat. The teen's legs twitched for a few moments before he fell limp, and the morose man greedily finished his horrifying meal. I could see the outline of the boy's carcass bulging through the morose man's thin flesh. The lumpy meat slowly passed through its digestive system, bloating the being into something even larger. something twice as imposing. The entity wiped its lips, smiled, and took measured steps towards me. I backed into the corner of the wooden structure. There was no escape. I accepted that, and I watched the man's awful bony fingers weave through the crack between the saloon doors. With his rotting fingernails mere inches from my face, the morose man suddenly froze. He eyed me with black pupils and bellowed. He spat fragments of flesh and guts throughout the playhouse, and then the ferocious being fled into the darkness. Struggling to believe that I had been spared the same fate as the boy, I frantically checked my phone. Midnight. I survived.